Stories and the passions of people on today's education landscape. This is In Conversation on Voice Ed Radio. I'm your host, Stephen Hurley. Well, today we are in for a subtle conversation. Yep, you heard me right, subtle. My guest today, Dr. Farzana Chohan, is a founder of an organization, Leadership in Women, a global platform enabling women to be leaders in their industries. She's a thought leader. She's optimistic about the future, and she is the author of a new book called Subtle. And as I read it, I realize that it's a book that's destined to get us thinking more deeply about the dispositions and the biases that we bring to our everyday lives. Dr. Chohan, welcome back to Voice Ed Radio. We've had you here before.
Thank you, Stephen, for inviting me back to talk about Subtle. Yes, I have been on the show and I tremendously enjoyed the conversation.
So the book is subtle. It's not a large volume, but I know that it has taken you a lot of time and a lot of thought and maybe some consternation as well. Why this book, and why this book now?
It is a lifelong journey, and the thought of Subtle started forming in my head some 7 years ago, almost 7 years ago. It was in 2014, and I was traveling from USA. My destination was Kuala Lumpur for an international convention, but I made a stop. And it was when I was in Holland, I saw the news blurring on TV in Holland in a small town, fire in St. Louis. I was living some 13 miles away from that fire and that militarization. That made me started thinking about what our unconscious biases are and why we are still in such a turmoil in the world, that we are coming across it. I went to Kuala Lumpur on that trip, and I saw another form of living where three distinctly different religions live together in relative harmony. Okay, no, nothing in this world is perfect, but the headlines, which I was looking in a small town in Utrecht, in Holland, was very different from the life I kind of observed superficially in Kuala Lumpur. And I thought that it is our internal biases. It is very subtle form of biases which we all carry and we are living. If we try, we can live in relative harmony. And that's where I started my writing about Subtle based on the Michael Brown's case and aftermath of it. There are several different ways to answer this question: why Subtle, why now? But I thought, and one of very powerful women who is working to uplift women in the boards of corporate world told me 3 years ago, when I told her I'm writing a book on unconscious biases, and she said, "Oh, we don't need any one more book on unconscious bias or racism." And coming from a very powerful leader, if they still think that we don't need to think about it, we don't need to talk about it, that's why we will remain in this loop of lows and highs of our moment, when we will say, okay, we need to do something about it. And then this whole moment will subside, and we will move on to something else until it will come back and rear its ugly head.
So at the very end of your book, you have a very poignant statement, and I'd like to read that. And I want you to kind of bring us into the vision. You say, "The most important factor which I have come to understand through the writing of this book is the power and potential of humans. In the big world of subtle, a relatively small percentage of humans have continually made a positive impact for others." So when you say a relatively small percentage of humans, that means most of us aren't doing that, aren't doing what you envision.
We all are human beings. We all are humans of good heart. We try to do good things in life, but we are very selective on the good we do. So I'm not saying that we don't try at our individual level to do good, but when I say a small percentage, the type of transformation which society need, there is a very small percentage of people who do that, and we have to find them. We don't even talk about them. In the book, I give example. I have three people whom I really look up to as an example. That includes Abdus Sattar Eg, who in the absence of any national support to provide services to citizens of the country in Pakistan, started his own movement. Likewise, I talk about Dr. Ruth Pfau, who took on her shoulders to eradicate the disease of leprosy, which is infectious. And in that book, I also talk about a lady named Mary Parker Foley. She is American. She is mother of management. She came up with lot of good ideas on how the business and management world can do good for the people around them in late 1800 1900s. But we don't hear about those people, and they have done tremendous work. So that's what I mean when I say relatively small percentage of human beings do things which are genuinely for the good of fellow citizens without any vested interest of their own.
But your vision is that more of us will be doing that more often if we can become more aware of those subtle biases that maybe they're not so subtle, and open ourselves up to some of that optimistic thinking that you come with in spades here.
So my optimism is that we have to uncover the goodness of our heart. It is there, but we become part of the social conformity and we don't do it. And you are right that more people can do it once they become aware of what their power is, what their human capacity and human power is, which is not a superpower actually, because we have come to this point through the subtle conditioning. So we can get out from this by reconditioning ourselves and our qualities of helping others, supporting others.
Many of the books about racism and about our biases often leave us feeling helpless and a little bit ashamed of ourselves. But your book is actually hopeful, and that aspirational vision at the end really ties all of that together.
It is because I say I have said this in the book also. After going through the research and reading and observing and seeing one aftermath, one toxic event after another, I really felt depressed. I really thought there is no hope in life. That was my feeling. And then I said, we have come this far in our civilization. It is not possible that we arrived here just because of one turmoil after another. There must have been some good done, which keeps our world going to the next level. We just have to make it more mainstream, and that's why I started looking at what is our way of transformation. I am not using the word change. I am not using the word way out of this, because the way we have been into this has taken generations and centuries. So to overcome this or to move out of it will take us a lot of time, but it will all start from our own inner self, our intrinsic human qualities, not looking for an external hero or a superman or a superwoman to come out and take us out from this turmoil.
Right. It's going to be us together working on this. Farzana, tell me about the title "subtle." I often associate subtle with another word, nuanced. The subtleties and nuances of life. Tell me about what you mean by that word, subtle.
So that is a very good observation, and the use of word nuances. I thought about that, but subtle, as I see it, is a sum of our unconscious biases, and it starts when a child is born in any family, any religion, any culture, any part of the world. We start to look at how we will make child part of our family, our community, our group. So we start training them, whatever situation we are in. and we tell them to do this and not to do this, be fearful of these things and be fearful of other things, which starts from skin tone, skin colors, tall people. In my case, I have an unconscious bias toward tall people, correct? So that is a microculture influence where a child starts. Although we are trying to make them a better human being, but we don't realize that we are giving them our unconscious biases. What and then we integrate them into the larger society, the society which is outside of us, immediately outside of us, our peripheral groups, and then when they become adult they go out of that, and we at every step of the time we try to integrate them in those other groups, larger groups they are going to move. Example, a very sad example, which I also talk in the book about, are the fraternities. The death of Robert Champion at A&M University, that you have to go through the ritual to be socially conformed and part of that group. So subtle is that social conditioning which accumulate unconscious biases, the mindsets and the worldviews and values in us. At the end of that, we become a very subtle being where we are very civil, we are very polite, we are very kind on the face to each other, and if we don't like anything of them, we know how to get back, we know how to not to let them grow, develop, get promotion, become a better corporate leader, or any other development in their part. We know how not to do that in a very subtle way without taking our revolver out and shooting them down as a drill.
Right. So when we talk about subtle biases and how they develop in young people right from those early years of life, we're not talking about a parent or a grandparent sitting someone down and saying, these are the people you need to avoid. We don't like these people. It's something that we pass on, well, more subtly.
Yes, I'll give you a personal example. For example, I come from a very conservative background. So when girls are growing up over there, they in an effort to discourage them from going out too much. I was always told, don't go out by yourself, and be aware of tall people. Be aware of any tall person who is taller than you. They are not good people. They can harm you. What it has done, and I can laugh about it now, but what it has done is that it has created an automatic bias, unconscious bias in me. Wherever I see a tall person, man or a woman, my first instinct is that they are here to harm me, although that's not true. So sometimes when you say something without understanding that what kind of an accumulated layer it can have in your brain, in your mind, these becomes part of your total bag, the total folder you carry with yourself, what is good and what is harmful.
Well, if I were afraid and taught to be afraid of tall people, that would make me afraid of about 50% of the world's population, because I'm not that tall. So that's
and that is exactly what I am saying, that I can laugh about it now because I'm not afraid of tall people. I think they are as good as not so tall people, but it is a benign example of unconscious bias. There are very malignant example of such unconscious biases.
So in your book, you outline some of those, and I was told by a priest in a Catholic seminary in theology class never to trust any isms, except for, of course, Catholicism. That was fine, but all the other isms were dangerous and harmful. So you take on some of the isms in your book. Tell me about how you decided which ones would be part of your thinking.
Originally, my thought about isms was that I'm going to list, and I want to make it a living document. People can list their own isms, but I look at it from the perspective of what are the isms which are very persistent in 21st century. What is happening right now in terms of isms? And isms comes from Greek, the action and the purpose. So I take on So racism, we all know about racism, and racism in North American context and European context is black and white. But there are so many isms which are folded under racism that we don't even identify them as isms. So, for example, I talk about colorism, which is a distinctive form of racism. I talk about intellectualism. I talk about ageism. I talk about brandism, and brandism is a very mainstream unconscious bias. We pre-COVID, we were crazy about having brands. Okay, when I say we, maybe it does not include you and me, but we all were judged and valued by what kinds of brands we carry, what kinds of brands we own, what kinds of brands we follow. So these are the recent isms. Accentism, in my case, I have come across that a lot. Nameism and lookism are two of the isms which are very well documented by National Public Radio, also NPR, on their race card project. And I highly recommend everyone to listen to NPR's race card project episodes. But these are the isms which are prevalent right now in our society at this moment when we speak, and we need to be aware of them, recognize them. I have only picked up the isms which I am very familiar with, and I was able to talk to people and get their stories about it. I This list is not total. It will have a lot more in them.
So Daniel Kahneman and others talk about things like thinking fast and thinking slow, and that our brains are actually trained to think quickly and make snap judgments. You know, you think of the work of Malcolm Gladwell in Blink. It covered the same type of thing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
How do we begin to, because it takes a sort of a cognitive slowing down that I'm not sure in our cultures today we are prepared or tooled to do.
Okay, so when we are not prepared to or have tools to do this, there is an intervention which happens. And in last 1 year, we have gone through that intervention by nature. I'm avoiding the word which is associated with intervention, like divine intervention. But this is the intervention where the world came to a halt because we were not paying attention to what is happening physically and spiritually or emotionally around us. This has given us a chance to reset ourselves when we are not getting in our cars, not on the go all the time, when we are spending more time with our families, good or bad. I'm not judging that. But, but the point here is that as the natural intervention has taught us, we are still in that right now. We have to consciously make an effort ourselves to slow down, to take a stock. What is important for us? What is not important for us? What do we want to be known as a human being? How do we sleep with total peace of mind? Or rather, we keep on thinking about how someone else has done something to us and we will get back to them. In a nutshell, as I say in the book also, we have to reset. We have to follow the concept of reset, which we use all the time for our digital devices. We have become so good in resetting our digital devices. If they malfunction or if they are not functioning correctly and not giving us those instant reactions, we have to do the same thing in our life also.
So is it necessary, Farzana, as you have done, you have kind of excavated a whole lifetime of, I guess, your personal experiences. You bring out many stories in the book. That requires some digging and some, as I say, excavation. Do we all need to be doing that on a personal level, or is there some starting point that can get us on the road without having to dig too far in the past, as you know, to determine why we think the way we do?
So digging and excavation sounds like a little bit of more involved process. I will say that with our own human brains, if we start with self awareness and our observations. So, for example, if we see someone bad mouthing someone, and instead of joining them in that whisper campaign, if we stop, pause ourselves, and become self aware, if that other person who is bad mouthing, what is the reason behind it? And the person who is the target of it, is that really makes sense? So, self awareness and recognition of our own emotions, I think, is the starting point. Of course, for me, it has taken almost 7 years because I was trying to bring it to the light of other people. I am asking everyone, they don't have to start a movement, they don't have to start correcting others. And please, I don't want anyone to correct any other person. It is a self reflection journey. Reflect on yourself, who you are. Is this you are? Is this the group you want to belong to? Your alumni group, your family, friends group. And again, I'm not asking you to disown anyone or everyone, but what I'm asking is start a self reflection, start self awareness and self recognition, and that will be a starting point. Take one step at a time. Because if you try to take on everything, that will be quite depressing.
So I'm thinking in the world of social media, and especially the social media that has developed in the past decade. I think if you were on Twitter 11 or 12 years ago, you would notice a difference than Twitter now. I think in one respect, social media has revealed the subtle biases that we come with. At the same time, I'm thinking that social media has exacerbated the problem uh, to a large extent by allowing us to gather in groups that think the way we do. Have you thought about social media in the context of subtle?
I have thought a lot about social media in the context of subtle, and I call it a contemporary subtle. It has become a coding methods in our brain. Now we are filling in the vacuum from the past, where the information was given to us from the books and printed media. We are doing it through the electronic media and the social media specifically. There are always pros and cons of everything. Social media has actually connected us globally. Everyone has access to information, both good and bad. Uh, Social media has to be responsible instead of joining the forces of old techniques like propaganda and making them now branding campaigns or whisper campaigns. They have to ethically reflect on themselves also. People who are on social media, they also have a choice to make, that what will be for the good of their individual sake and for the good of the society, and use social media wisely. Otherwise, the impact of social media is going to take us to a, pardon me for a use of a strong analogy, to a black hole where we will never be able to get out of it. Because one form of social media which has been used in last many years is virtue signaling and tokenism.
Talk to me about signaling, because I've heard it and I think I know what you're referring to, but tell us a little more.
So virtue signaling, we understand virtue, what virtue is. When we want to come across to the rest of the world, or even in our immediate circle, as a very virtuous person, we will give different hints and different signals about it. That, oh, I care for uh, people who are not as have as much economic power as I do. So I constantly give to charities. I constantly, and I'll put up. Sorry, it becomes a photo op. I will put a picture of my giving on my social media and will tell everyone that I am so philanthropic that I am giving money for social causes. That is virtue signaling, because if you give once and you advertise it, that means this is a photo op. This is for telling other people that how good you are, while you will never do it again. You will never make it happen again, and you don't genuinely make it. when I gave the example of Abdul Sattar Eidi, Dr. Rutfau, Mary Parker Follett, we have never heard about these people in a larger world. What they did was not virtue signaling, it was not tokenism, it was from their heart a genuine desire to improve the life of the people. So, in today's world and in social media's world, virtue signaling is more for the sake of tokenism. Let's signal it. So, in last since George Floyd's death, what has happened is that all the corporations have jumped on the bandwagon of diversity and inclusion. So, if you look at the websites, if you look at any kind of marketing coming out from them, they all are taking pledges, and their photographs on their home pages will be showing colored people. This is tokenism. This is virtue signaling. The proof is in the pudding. How many people have you really included in your folds? How many people you have promoted? How much inclusion has happened, both for in terms of the gender context and in terms of a real change? I can get really emotional about it because this has I am observing this since last 20 years. Every time people will say, "Oh, our corporation, our business, our organization is so great, and we cannot. You are assuming wrong about us." It's not wrong assumptions. It's not wrong perceptions. What you do, and what you don't do is very clear to people. Back to you, Stephen.
Yeah, one of the other terms that I'm hearing more and more of, and I don't totally have a handle on it, is gaslighting, which I think is part of that way of thinking as well.
Yes, it is. And there are several different terms which are being used in today's world: gaslighting, photo op diversity, especially, and it has been called upon in last a few political elections, whether it is left or right. When they are putting their candidate in a photograph, they will make sure that they have a perfect placement of all kind of colors and ethnicities around them. But when you look at their top leadership, their core leadership, which is advising them, it will not have that same reflection.
So, Farzana, in the final reel, and you've been very generous with your time and your thinking. I'm wondering, from an education point of view, because we spend a lot of time here talking about education. When you think of what could be done, what should be done at the school level, especially in those early years, do you see a place for curriculum here? Do we have the structure that we already that we need to maybe be talking about this with students? How would you like to see education play a role in this?
I think education can play a great role in it. We have to revisit what our curriculum, what we are teaching to our children, because uh, those brains are the most fertile brains in my thought. My hope is in this young generation, in the future generations. They are not as ingrained in the antiquated mindset as we were when we were growing up. So, in our education, if we allow them to think, reflect, and do not socially conform with what is told to them, so help them in developing a critical thinking and analytical observations, and integrate in them that how they can play and socialize with each other. And children do that naturally. They do that. If you look at any child under the 3 years of an age, for them the color, the form of the person, the personality or ethnicity, they don't question all of that. They play with each other, they interact very well. But when they go home, and sometimes they are told by their parents or family members or neighbors that don't interact with that person, that's where it started forming. But going back to your question, we need to revisit our curriculum and really think outside of the box and let children learn from each other, and maybe we can learn and integrate some of that learning in our curriculum also. Let them be a little bit more free thinkers and free learners. And I don't use the term free thinkers and free learners as it is being perceived as negative, but let them be children, let them learn and learn from their interactions. There are a lot of movements which have happened in that regard. Gather the good practices around the world and use them.
Dr. Farzana Chohan, thank you so much for being here. I'm enjoying reading the book. I'm almost finished. I kind of jumped around a bit, but I think I'm going to take another read of it now that I've spoken to you. This has been inspirational for me. Thank you.
I appreciate that. I want to say one last thing. The way book is written, it's on purpose, kept very simple and straightforward. I did not want it to write a 600 pages volume. It is for everyone to think and reflect and find your inner good self, which will lead to the world of human for humans. So please read it and let me know what you think about it.
The book is subtle, and my guest today has been Dr. Farzana Chohan. You are listening to Voice Ed Radio in Conversation. I'm Stephen Hurley. Thank you for being here.